It's very true. The Phoenix Suns had a lot of not nice things tweeted about them since they were eliminated very swiftly by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Game 4 was fun. It was competitive, but the series did not seem too competitive. That was, to me, the feeling I was feeling about the general vibes of Phoenix before Game 4 was, if you go back to last season in the playoffs, before they went out and made the Bradley Beal trade, of course, but the Nuggets absolutely annihilated Phoenix in games 5 and 6. And then the Suns were not even close in any, really, of the first 3 games of that series. That, to me, was the real reaction of, it's not just like, oh, this is a tough fought that, like, to be down by 30 in a couple of these fourth quarters, or not 30, but 25, whatever the exact differential was. They were not contests. And it's similar with Miami, right? Where if, like, you're not even in a punching distance away when you're already having this big of a tax bill, and Phoenix is even more in the hole compared to the Heat, where basically right now they don't do anything besides bring back Royce O'Neal to even just like a market value contract. They're going to be flirting with a $200 million cap sheet before they then start paying taxes, and you calculate what the actual bill that Matt Ishbia is going to have to pay is. So there's a lot to discuss and a lot to break down and think about this team. But what I want to start with is that I tuned in to Matt Ishbia's press conference from Phoenix yesterday, and the Suns from him, and then James Jones, who spoke afterwards. And what I've been hearing all week being on the phone about it, like, the Suns are not in panic mode. They are telling us that. They do not think their house is on fire, which I believe Ishbia said multiple times. Might have said it more than Reggie Miller and Jamal Crawford said pace during the Dallas Mavericks offensive possessions. And they are confident that they are positioned to get access to their 2024 first-round pick, which I believe is slated for number 22, and then their 2031 pick. So they have 2 first-rounders to play with. They have 2 seconds to play with. But here's where things start to get really tricky, because they are, without a doubt, going to be in the second apron unless they decide to do drastic things that they're not going to do, because they made it pretty clear. Phoenix's plan is pretty much going to be to run this thing back. They're happy to say that they've got their whole starting 5 on the books for next year, and they're just going to need to rearrange some of the window dressing and see what happens better. And if that's the case, like, wading into this second apron world, they are not going to be able to get back any more salary than they send out in trades. They are not going to be able to aggregate contracts together. So one example, they could not put Yusuf Nurkic and Nasir Little together to go get a $25 million player. You're just not allowed to do that.
Right.
You're not going to be able to have the mid-level exception. You are not going to be able to sign and trade and get stuff back. They're also going to be forfeiting their 2032 pick. Just going to be frozen until they potentially could get out of the second apron, but they're not going to.
Right. If they're not trading Kevin Durant or Bradley Beal, they're not getting out of the second apron.
Exactly. And one thing I learned from talking to some cap strategists around the league this week, teams are kind of positioning themselves to make like a 2-year kind of all-in run. So the question I am looking to ask Matt Ishbia more than anything is, does the money truly just not matter, and you're just going to be fronting the bill? And to what end, or is there no end? Because they're basically going to be in the second apron for the next couple of years. It just means their pick is going to be frozen, while other teams are definitely looking at it as, well, you can only, if you're in the apron for year 1, so year 1 for this intent and purposes is 24-25. Over the next 4 years, if you're in the apron again twice, so 3 out of 5 years, that 2032 pick is no longer just frozen. It is forced to be the 30th pick in the draft.
It moves all the way to the bottom of the first round.
And then it's just there. It's stuck. It's done. So Minnesota, interestingly enough, they are pretty much stacking their books to the point where Mike Conley's 2-year extension ends after this 2-year. They're going to be in potential in the second. They're basically going to be in the apron no matter what. Second apron next year, Minnesota. And then Rudy Gobert's got a player option. Naz Reid's got a player option. They kind of have this like perfect 2-year window set up to be in the apron, freeze that pick, and then they can get out. And then that pick becomes unfrozen later down the line. Phoenix doesn't have that opportunity. And I don't know necessarily what changing Frank Vogel is going to do for this team when that is the circumstance. Dan, do you have any thoughts on that particular aspect of this equation and all the questions that are being asked about the Phoenix Suns right now?
Yeah, I mean, the segment is a vibe check. And I think the argument behind the offseason moves last summer was that the vibes had gotten rancid under Monty Williams, right? Like DeAndre Ayton was lost. They could not continue to bring back Chris Paul and expect him to be healthy. What had the positivity of that finals run had, long since frittered away and was gone. And so it was like, even if you didn't totally believe Frank Vogel was going to be like, I don't know, like an injection of adrenaline straight into the heart of Phoenix Suns basketball, or that Yusuf Nurkic was going to be a dramatic improvement over DeAndre Ayton or whatever. It was like, well, what we had wasn't working anymore. And we were already like halfway through changing that. So might as well rip the Band-Aid off the rest of the way and, get busy living or get busy dying. And I think you find yourself in a similar set of circumstances now where Frank Vogel, there is a reasonable argument to be made that like you brought him there basically to say, I don't know how the hell we're going to make a defense out of this team, but you know how to do that. And you have a championship on your resume. So like we can sell it and do something. And then they were like a slightly above average defense with that roster, which, you could argue like mission accomplished, job well done, Frank. But this is the NBA and it's a personality-based business and it's a relationships-based business, right? And if the judging by the fact that there were stories ready to hit publish on the second the buzzer and sounded for them that were like, Kevin Durant doesn't like his role in the offense. They stopped listening to Frank Vogel. They were laughing when he was trying to get tough with them. It's like, well, then whether Frank Vogel is right or not is almost immaterial. Like if the team's not listening to him and he no longer has the ear, then somebody else would need to come in to get it. I think the main question is like, who will have the ear of superstars? Like, I mean, if you are, while the stories about I had to stop myself from laughing at Frank Vogel raising his voice to us, those are anonymously sourced comments. I think but you have to raise the question of like, you have superstars on this roster, or you have two superstars and you have Bradley Beal who's being paid like a superstar, and you need a coach to come in and command their respect, right? Who's that? Who's going to do it? And who's going to command their respect to a level where like, if Kevin Durant doesn't like being spaced behind the 3-point line and shooting threes, like, well, your offense sucked when no one was shooting threes and somebody needs to, and Grayson Allen was hurt. So like sometimes you got to do the job, right? Who's going to get them to do that? Who's going to convince those guys that instead of playing the way they want to play, they might need to play a little bit of a different way to make it work? And not to demonize Kevin Durant in that conversation. I mean, like Kevin Durant played his ass off defensively this season. He was an all NBA caliber player. He was the most durable and accountable of all of those guys during the regular season. But I think assuming that a contender is just waiting there because you bring back the starting five of a team that won 49 games and then got absolutely drilled in round one, as it assumes facts not clear in evidence. And so I think Kevin Durant has not necessarily seemed particularly thrilled with any way that anybody has wanted him to play for a while.
James Jones said no one has maximized Kevin Durant, and the Phoenix Suns plan to be the first team to do it. So that's not reassuring. I don't know what is.
Yeah, of course. I mean, also, I guess we've sort of memory hold the point where he was playing off a, Stephen Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, because that was a pretty maximized Kevin Durant. But
I thought the same thing.
But anyway, all that to be said, like, you were giving minutes, to Drew Eubanks in the series. You were giving minutes to Eric Gordon in this series. You were giving minutes to, Thaddeus Young, buyout signing, didn't wind up making too much of an impact in this series. Like, Josh Okogie wound up getting off the bench in this series. Like, there's not a lot of there once you get past that starting five. Even if you believe that starting five is championship caliber, what happens after that matters a great deal. And I think the thing that what this series showed as much as anything was, I think there was a way to look at the Suns, and I fell prey to this too. Like, I picked the Suns to win this series because I thought they matched up fantastically with Minnesota, and I'm thinking, like, in the context of a postseason series, they fit better what the postseason is because they're going to have multiple guys who can create shots. And the reality is, Minnesota fit a lot better for what the postseason is because Minnesota could play harder and more physically and absolutely shut your water off. And the Suns did not have another way to play. And so, how do you find more guys that give you another way to play, ramp up that level of physicality? Like, a finesse team only kind of gets so far when they're not creating consistent shots. And so I don't know what the answer is to get that to that point. Coaching is a big part of that, but also, like, as you mentioned, limited avenues to get that second influx of talent behind those top guys. And so, like, I get Matt Ishbia saying we're not in a good position, we're in a great position. I think that feels like you're looking at things through a certain lens that I don't know that, and I understand why he thinks that because he owns the thing. I think that you're going to need to see some more reinforcements coming in, and I don't know how they get them.
The Suns can absolutely look at this and say the team that just destroyed us, they were kind of in a very similar boat. They made a huge trade, emptied the war chest. They were the laughing stock of the league. Oh, the Rudy Gobert trade was such a disaster. They go out in the first round very quietly. Of course, they were missing Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid, but Phoenix is missing Grayson Allen for the majority of the series. They come back. Bradley Beal, this is going to be his first full healthy offseason in like half a decade. People talk about Brad as like he's 35. He's still in his prime in theory, just around 30. Like, you swap out you look around the playoffs right now, the guys who are on minimums who are thriving are just absolutely huge swing pieces for their team. Like, we talked about Derek Jones at the top during the Dallas stuff. For the Mavs to find a legitimate two-way starter at the minimum who's now like creating off the dribble and attacking closeouts and figuring out how to be some type of like hybrid big in the dunker, but also a corner three-point shooter. Kelly Oubre being this bulldog who's making Jalen Brunson work harder than almost anyone has all season. Like, those are the types of signings. The Suns need one of those to work out, without a doubt. Then there's like a couple of people and a school of thought going around the league that, like, Phoenix, if the money thing isn't an issue, Phoenix probably will be best served massively overpaying Royce O'Neal, giving him some type of 2-year, $40 million team option or a 1-year deal like Bruce Brown got, because then you could trade him for two pieces back, which that's going to cost $60 million in tax penalties if you're paying roughly 60. I don't know the exact math in front of me, but that is the ballpark of what that extra flexibility will cost you. So I could understand why looking at the coach would be a quick fix, because James Jones and Matt Ishbia made it very clear during their press availability that the questions and the pleas for a point guard, they would just rather have the ball in one of those three guys' hands instead. And you could say that there would be benefit in getting someone to just make sure all these guys are getting an even diet of their shots and getting them in the spots that they want. But, like, how many players are going to be available at the equivalent of Nasir Little's $7-ish million? I mean, TJ McConnell has been a name that's been around that organization's, proverbial wish list for a while, but there aren't many players like that who are also like available for the taking. Yeah. So that's going to be a real challenge. I just don't. And to go back to the vibes of this all, the whole league saw Frank Vogel going absolutely ballistic on the sidelines and losing his composure. And it was not a good look. It was definitively not a good look. Like, I was surprised how that has been such a consistent piece of conversation in my phone calls this week. Just about eyes popping out of his face, complaining about the officials and jumping up and down. And that's not exactly the way to go back into that locker room or that huddle and get these guys to buy back in. But Mike Budenholzer, to my knowledge, was never really a serious candidate last year going around for this particular job in Phoenix. And there's no guarantee he is going to come in and relate to these guys differently and better. While then you're also paying Frank Vogel $24 million to not work for you. And the guy that's been on their wish list from a coaching standpoint, it's been very well known, Ty Lue, he's not going to be available. Because of all the interest from Phoenix and elsewhere, he got his 24-25 year of his contract guaranteed. And the Clippers, knowing that this guy on their books is so widely regarded, they're not just going to let Ty Lue walk for nothing. They're not just going to let him out of his deal and say goodbye. Like, the recent precedent for giving over your head coach, Doc Rivers to the Clippers from Boston, Jason Kidd to Milwaukee after that from Brooklyn, first round pick, which we already discussed. The Suns don't exactly have a ton of those in the war chest. So Ishbia said Wednesday that hasn't even had a conversation yet about what to do about Vogel or James Jones or whoever. I would think that those conversations will be wrapped up by the end of this week as he's in town and talking to people and whatever. But I'm right here, right now on Thursday at 11:11 Eastern. I'm not seeing an obvious replacement. And like, there's always been a proverbial school of thought, or prevailing school of thought, not proverbial, that you don't fire the coach unless you really know who you're going to be replacing him with. And they're just Docs in Milwaukee. Like, there's been such a retread of coaches the last couple of years that those options are pretty much limited to Bud. And that's not to say I don't think Bud couldn't do a better job. I think there's such few coaches that are actually going to like enter a situation and dramatically change everything. And I don't really know what better outcomes are out there outside of trying to regroup and run this thing back. Then again, what we saw, clearly Frank was frustrated and coming from a place of like desperation. That was bubbling to a head in all of his sideline antics. Like, it was a clear human experience what was happening there. If that is the tip of the iceberg indicating how split he became from his players, which the eye rolling, what have you, has been going on for a large stretch of time, I would say. And part of it too is like Vogel's coaching staff, dating back to the pre-trade deadline, they only trusted 5 dudes anyway.
Yeah.
So like, how does that set a good grounds for like a connective team that's all moving in the same direction if the coaches only want to play 5 guys?
Yeah, it was the old it was the Nick Nurse in Toronto question of like, is he only playing 5 guys because the other guys aren't worthy of trust, or do the other guys not play well because he doesn't trust them? And like, so do you need to give him a better roster, or does he need to better use what he's got in the house? I don't know how much the Suns are going to be able to improve the roster behind those 5 guys. So whoever is coaching, whether it's Vogel or somebody else, is going to have to figure out how to make do with what he's got. But I think I have the answer, Jake. I think I've got an idea for coach that players would respect, vibes elevator, potentially available and not under contract to coach anywhere else.
Don't say what I think you're going to say.
I don't know. Ricky Rubio. Get him back from Spain. Bring
That's
him
a
over.
great answer. I thought you were going to say JJ.
No. Well, listen, I wouldn't presume to lean on our friendship in that way, but no, listen, Rubio vibes elevator. You wrote a great piece about that last summer, where like the guards he's mentored, the people he's elevated along the way. Devin Booker being one of them.
There you go. Jinx.
So you bring back franchise, an important part of the elevation of that franchise. You bring him back. Certainly knows his stuff from an X's and O's perspective. I don't know. I'm like, he might not be interested, but I'd at least make the phone call.
On a serious note, there's going to be some type of change on the coaching staff because lead assistant Kevin Young, who was the highest paid assistant in the league, another element of Matt Ishbia, spend, try to make this thing the premier franchise in all of sports, not the NBA, all of sports. And there's it's a hole on the bench. He's leaving for BYU for a very, very long-term deal, which is a great opportunity for KY, who has been a young coach in the rising head coaching candidate pool for a long time. People definitely thought he could have been a potential to go to Nick Nurse. He could have been a potential lever to pull. You make Frank Vogel your Dwayne Casey and make Kevin Young your Nick Nurse, but that's just not an option anymore. And I wonder I don't have a sense yet, but whether it's Chicago, they moved on from Chris Fleming on Billy Donovan's bench, and Mo Cheeks is moving to a different role. Steve Kerr has to address some things on his coaching staff. There's going to be a lot of first, second assistant seats being swapped around the league. That is one opportunity for Phoenix to do something to inject some type of new voice onto that bench, even if they don't end up moving on for Frank Vogel. So